The bus pulled into New York City just as the sun was beginning to set behind the tall buildings. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the dirty window and watched the city lights flicker on one by one. She had never seen so many buildings in her life. Back home in her small town in New Mexico, the tallest structure was the water tower near the old church. But here, everything stretched toward the sky, like it was trying to touch the clouds. She was 32 years old, and this was the first time she had ever left her home state. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held onto her bag. Inside that bag was everything that mattered to her. A change of clothes, $47 in cash, and a photograph so old and faded that the edges had started to curl inward. Elena stepped off the bus and immediately felt lost. People rushed past her in every direction. Nobody looked at her. Nobody smiled. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going, and she felt like she was standing still in the middle of a river that was flowing too fast. She had spent 2 years saving for this trip. 2 years of working double shifts at the diner. 2 years of skipping meals and wearing the same shoes until holes appeared in the soles. Her coworkers thought she was crazy. Her neighbors whispered that she had lost her mind. Even her own mother, before she passed away last spring, had begged her to let go of this dream. But Elena could not let go. She had made a promise to her mother on her deathbed, and she intended to keep it. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and read the address one more time. Hartwell Concert Hall. It was one of the most famous music venues in the entire country. The greatest pianists in the world had performed there, and tonight, Elena was going to walk through its doors and tell them something that would change everything. It took her nearly an hour to find the place. She got lost twice and had to ask strangers for directions. Most of them ignored her. But a kind old woman selling flowers on a corner pointed her in the right direction. When Elena finally stood in front of the concert hall, she had to stop and catch her breath. The building was beautiful. Tall white columns stood at the entrance like guards protecting something precious inside. The doors were made of dark, polished wood, and above them hung a golden sign with the name of the hall written in elegant letters. Elena looked down at her own clothes. She was wearing a dress she had bought from a thrift store for $12. It was a little too big for her, and there was a small stain near the hem that she had tried to scrub out, but could not remove completely. Her shoes were old and worn, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She did not belong here. She knew that. But she had come too far to turn back now. Elena took a deep breath and walked up the steps. When she pushed open the heavy door, she stepped into a world she had only ever seen in magazines. The lobby was enormous, with marble floors that reflected the light from crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. There were paintings on the walls of men and women in fancy clothes, all of them holding instruments or sitting at pianos. The air smelled like fresh flowers and expensive perfume. A woman sat behind a large wooden desk near the entrance. She had silver hair pulled into a tight bun and wore a black dress with a pearl necklace. When she saw Elena approaching, her eyes moved up and down, taking in every detail of her appearance. Her expression did not change, but Elena could feel the judgment in her gaze. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. Her voice was polite, but there was a coldness underneath it. Elena swallowed hard. "I need to speak with someone about the Orlov estate." The woman's eyebrow lifted slightly. "The Orlov estate? Do you have an appointment?" "No," Elena admitted, "but it is very important. Please, I have come a long way." The woman studied her for a moment, then picked up a phone and spoke quietly into it. Elena could not hear what she was saying, but she saw the woman glance at her several times during the conversation. Finally, she hung up and looked at Elena with something close to pity. "Someone will be with you shortly. Please wait over there." Elena walked to a small seating area and sat down on a velvet chair that was softer than her bed back home. She clutched her bag against her chest and waited. Minutes passed. Then, more minutes. She watched people come and go through the lobby. Men in expensive suits, women in elegant gowns. All of them looked like they belonged here. All of them looked at her like she did not. Finally, a door opened and 3 people walked out. 2 men in dark suits, and a younger woman carrying a clipboard. They approached Elena with careful steps, like they were approaching a stray animal that might bite. "I am Richard Hartwell," the older man said. He was tall, with gray hair and a face that looked like it had never smiled. "I am the chairman of this institution and the executor of the Orlov estate. I understand you wanted to speak with me?" Elena stood up quickly, almost dropping her bag. "Yes, thank you for seeing me. I know this is strange, but I needed to tell you something important." She reached into her bag and pulled out the photograph. Her hands were trembling as she held it out to them. The picture showed a young man sitting at a grand piano. He had dark hair and intense eyes, and his fingers were positioned over the keys like he was about to play the most beautiful song in the world. "This is Mikhail Orlov," Elena said. "The pianist. He died 20 years ago." Richard Hartwell looked at the photograph with an expression of annoyance. "I am well aware of who Mikhail Orlov was. I knew him personally for over 15 years. What exactly is your point?" Elena's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment she had traveled across the country for. The moment her mother had told her about with her dying breath. "Mikhail Orlov was my father," she said. The silence that followed was so complete that Elena could hear the ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance. The three people in front of her exchanged glances. The younger woman with the clipboard pressed her lips together like she was trying not to laugh. The second man in the suit coughed and looked away. Richard Hartwell stared at Elena for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. But it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just heard a very bad joke. "Is that so?" he said softly. Elena nodded. "My mother knew him. They were together for a short time, many years ago. She never told anyone. She made me promise not to say anything until after she was gone. But now, she is gone. And I needed to come here. I needed someone to know the truth." Richard Hartwell folded his arms across his chest. "Young lady, do you have any idea how many people have walked through these doors claiming to be Orlov's secret child? How many letters we receive every month from people saying they are his long-lost relative?" Elena felt her face growing hot. "I am not lying. I have proof. I have this photograph. My mother gave it to me. She said he gave it to her himself." The younger woman finally let out a small laugh, then quickly covered her mouth with her hand. Richard Hartwell shook his head slowly, looking at Elena like she was a child who had said something foolish. "That photograph has been published in dozens of magazines and books. Anyone could have a copy of it. That proves nothing. Number one." Elena opened her mouth to respond. But before she could speak, Richard Hartwell had already turned away. He gestured to the receptionist with the silver hair. "Please call security," he said. "This young woman needs to be escorted out." And that was when Elena realized that no one here was going to believe her. Not without a fight. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Security. They were calling security on her like she was some kind of criminal. She had not raised her voice. She had not threatened anyone. She had simply told them the truth, and now they wanted to throw her out like garbage. Two men in dark uniforms appeared from a side door and began walking toward her. They were big and serious looking, and Elena felt her stomach drop. She thought about all the money she had spent to get here, all the hours she had worked, all the meals she had skipped. She thought about her mother's face in those final days, thin and pale against the hospital pillow, whispering words that Elena would never forget. "Find them," her mother had said. "Tell them who you are. Promise me." Elena had promised. And she was not going to break that promise now. "Wait," she said, holding up her hands. "Please, just wait one moment." The security guard stopped a few feet away from her, looking at Richard Hartwell for instructions. The chairman sighed heavily, like Elena was wasting his precious time. "Young lady, I have a very busy schedule. I do not have time for this nonsense. Mikhail Orlov was a dear friend of mine, and I will not stand here and listen to some stranger make ridiculous claims about his personal life." "But I am not making it up," Elena said. Her voice cracked slightly, but she forced herself to keep going. "My mother's name was Rosa. Rosa Vasquez. She was a music student in California in 1989. She met Mikhail Orlov at a summer workshop. They fell in love. But he was already famous, and she was nobody. When she found out she was pregnant, she knew it would ruin his career if anyone found out. So she left. She went back to New Mexico and raised me alone. She never asked him for anything. She never told anyone who my father was. Richard Hartwell's expression did not change. If anything, he looked even more annoyed than before. That is a very touching story. But stories are not proof. Anyone can make up a story. I am not making it up, Elena repeated. She could feel tears building behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not cry in front of these people. She would not give them that satisfaction. By now, a small crowd had gathered in the lobby. Other staff members had come out of their offices to see what the commotion was about. Elena saw them whispering to each other, looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. She heard someone laugh quietly, and the sound cut through her like a knife. A woman in a red dress stepped forward. She was younger than Richard Hartwell, maybe in her 40s, with sharp eyes and an expensive-looking watch on her wrist. "Let me guess," she said with a smirk. "You want money. That is what this is really about, is it not? You heard that the Orlov estate is worth millions, and you thought you could come here with some sad story and walk away with a check." Elena shook her head firmly. "No. I do not want money. I have never wanted money." "Then what do you want?" Richard Hartwell asked. His voice was flat and impatient. Elena took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment she had been thinking about for months. She had rehearsed these words 1,000 times in her tiny apartment. She had whispered them to herself on the long bus ride across the country. And now, finally, she was going to say them out loud. "I want to play his piano," she said quietly. "The one he used to compose Winter Sparrow. I heard it is still here, in a special room. I just want to touch it. Just once. That is all I am asking for. Then I will leave and never bother you again." For a moment, nobody said anything. The lobby was completely silent. Elena looked at the faces around her, hoping to see some sign of understanding or compassion. But all she saw was disbelief, and then, slowly, the laughter began. It started with the woman in the red dress, a small chuckle that she tried to hide behind her hand. Then the man standing next to Richard Hartwell let out a snort. Within seconds, the whole room was laughing. Not loud, mean laughter, but the quiet kind that was almost worse. The kind that said they thought she was a joke. The kind that said she was not worth taking seriously. Elena felt her face burning with shame. Her eyes dropped to the floor, and she stared at her worn-out shoes against the shiny marble. She thought about her mother again. Her mother, who had worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. Her mother, who had taught her to play piano on a broken keyboard she found at a garage sale. Her mother, who had hummed the same melody to her every single night before bed. A melody, she said, came from Elena's father. "You want to play Orlov's piano?" Richard Hartwell said, still chuckling. "Do you even know how to play? That instrument is worth more than you will earn in your entire lifetime. We do not let just anyone touch it. Only the finest pianists in the world have that honor." Elena lifted her head. "I can play," she said softly. The woman in the red dress laughed again. "Oh, really? And where did you study? Juilliard? The Royal Conservatory?" "I taught myself," Elena said. "And my mother taught me. She was a good teacher." This brought even more laughter. The security guards were smiling now too, shaking their heads like they had seen this kind of thing before. Richard Hartwell wiped a tear from the corner of his eye and waved his hand dismissively. "This has been very entertaining, but I think we are done here. Please escort this young woman out." The security guard stepped forward again, and Elena felt her heart sink. It was over. She had come all this way, and it was over. She had failed. She had broken her promise to her mother. But then something unexpected happened. "Wait." The voice came from somewhere behind the crowd. It was quiet but firm, and it made everyone turn around. An elderly woman was standing near a doorway at the back of the lobby. She was small and thin, with white hair and deep wrinkles on her face. She wore simple clothes, nothing fancy, and she leaned on a wooden cane for support. But there was something in her eyes that made everyone pay attention. "Let me see her," the old woman said. Richard Hartwell frowned. "Mrs. Chen, this is not necessary. We were just about to remove her." But the old woman was already walking forward, her cane tapping against the marble floor with each step. The crowd parted to let her through, and Elena noticed that everyone seemed to treat her with respect. Even Richard Hartwell looked uncomfortable, like he did not want to argue with her. The old woman stopped directly in front of Elena and looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes moved slowly across Elena's face, studying every detail. Elena did not know what to do, so she just stood there, trying not to tremble. "What is your mother's name?" the old woman asked softly. "Rosa," Elena whispered. "Rosa Vasquez." Something flickered in the old woman's eyes. It was so quick that Elena almost missed it. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. It was hard to tell. "And this melody you mentioned, the one your mother hummed to you. Can you hum it for me now?" Quote, Elena hesitated. She had never sung or hummed in front of strangers before. But something about the old woman's gaze made her feel safe. So she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to hum the melody that had been with her since childhood. The melody that her mother said was written just for her. The melody that had no name. When she finished, she opened her eyes. The old woman's face had changed. She was staring at Elena with an expression that was impossible to read. Her hand was trembling on her cane, and her eyes were glistening with what looked like tears. "Where did you learn that?" the old woman whispered. "From my mother," Elena said. "She said my father wrote it for her, the night I was born." The old woman turned to face Richard Hartwell. When she spoke, her voice was no longer soft. It was sharp and commanding. "We are not calling security," she said firmly. "We are going to listen to what this young woman has to say, and we are going to give her a chance to prove who she is." Richard Hartwell opened his mouth to protest, but the old woman silenced him with a look. "I worked with Mikhail Orlov for over 30 years, she said. "I knew him better than anyone in this room, and I have never heard that melody before in my life. But I remember him playing something like it. Once. Many years ago. He told me it was for someone he loved but could never have." She turned back to Elena, and this time, there was warmth in her eyes. "My name is Mrs. Chen," she said. "And I think it is time we had a proper conversation." The lobby fell silent after Mrs. Chen spoke. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody whispered. Even Richard Hartwell, who had seemed so powerful just moments ago, looked uncertain. He glanced around at the other staff members like he was hoping someone would tell him what to do. Mrs. Chen took Elena gently by the arm and began leading her away from the crowd. Elena followed without asking questions. She did not know who this woman was or why she was helping her, but she felt something she had not felt since arriving in New York. She felt hope. They walked down a long hallway lined with photographs and framed concert programs. Elena saw pictures of famous musicians she recognized from magazines. Violinists, cellists, conductors in black suits waving their batons. And there, at the very end of the hallway, was a large portrait of a man sitting at a piano. His dark hair was slightly messy, and his eyes seemed to look directly at whoever was standing in front of the painting. Elena stopped walking. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. Her father, Mikhail Orlov. She had only ever seen that one photograph her mother kept. But this painting showed him differently. He looked older here, more tired, but his hands on the piano keys were beautiful and strong, and there was something in his expression that made Elena's heart ache. Mrs. Chen noticed that Elena had stopped. She looked at the painting too, and a sad smile crossed her face. "He was a complicated man," Mrs. Chen said softly. "Brilliant, yes, but also lonely. He gave everything to his music. I think sometimes he forgot that there were people who loved him, people who needed more than just his songs." Elena could not speak. She just stared at the painting, trying to memorize every detail of his face. Behind them, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Richard Hartwell appeared, followed by the woman in the red dress and two other men in suits. They did not look happy, but they also did not try to stop Mrs. Chen. "Mrs. Chen," Richard Hartwell said carefully, "I respect your judgment. I always have. But we cannot simply take this woman's word for something so serious. The Orlov estate is worth a great deal of money. There are legal matters to consider. We cannot just let anyone walk in here and claim to be part of his family." Mrs. Chen turned to face him. Despite her small size and her age, she seemed to fill the hallway with her presence. "I am not asking you to give her anything, Richard. I am asking you to give her a chance. There is a difference." "A chance to do what exactly?" Mrs. Chen looked at Elena. "You said you can play piano. Is that true?" Elena nodded. "Yes. I have been playing since I was 5 years old. My mother taught me everything she knew. And after she could not teach me anymore, I taught myself. I practiced every day, even when we did not have a real piano. I would draw keys on a piece of cardboard and practice on that." The woman in the red dress let out a small laugh. "Cardboard keys? You cannot be serious." But Mrs. Chen did not laugh. Her eyes stayed fixed on Elena, and there was something like respect in her gaze. "That takes dedication," she said. "Real dedication." Richard Hartwell sighed heavily. "Fine. If you want to give her a chance, then let us make it fair. We will take her to the practice room. There is an old upright piano there that we use for auditions. If she can play something, anything, at a level that shows she actually knows what she is doing, then we will continue this conversation. But if she cannot play, if she embarrasses herself, then she leaves, immediately, and she never comes back. Agreed?" He looked at Elena with cold eyes, waiting for her answer. Elena felt her stomach twist with fear. She had not played on a real piano in months. The old keyboard at her apartment had broken last winter, and she could not afford to fix it. What if her fingers had forgotten what to do? What if she froze up and could not play a single note? But then she thought about her mother. She thought about all those nights when her mother would sit beside her on the piano bench, guiding her small fingers across the keys. She thought about the pride in her mother's eyes whenever Elena learned a new song. She thought about the promise she had made. "Agreed," Elena said. They led her through a maze of hallways until they reached a small room at the back of the building. It was nothing like the grand lobby. The walls were plain white, and the floor was covered with old carpet that had stains on it. In the corner sat an upright piano. It was brown and scratched, and some of the keys looked yellow with age, but to Elena, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She walked toward it slowly, like she was approaching something sacred. Her fingers brushed against the wooden surface, feeling the smoothness of the finish. She pulled out the bench and sat down, adjusting her position until she felt comfortable. The room was crowded now. Richard Hartwell stood by the door with his arms crossed. The woman in the red dress leaned against the wall, a smirk still on her face. Several other staff members had followed them, curious to see what would happen. And Mrs. Chen stood closest to the piano, watching Elena with quiet intensity. "Whenever you are ready," Richard Hartwell said. His voice made it clear that he expected her to fail. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She tried to block out all the people watching her. She tried to forget about the pressure, and the doubt, and the fear. She thought about her mother's hands, soft and warm, resting on top of hers. She thought about the music that had filled their tiny home, even when everything else was falling apart. And then she began to play. But she did not play one of the famous Orlov compositions. She did not play Beethoven, or Chopin, or any of the pieces that serious musicians were supposed to know. Instead, she played something else entirely. Something that came from deep inside her, something that had no name. It was the melody. The one her mother had hummed to her every night. The one that had lived in her heart for as long as she could remember. Her fingers moved across the keys like they had a mind of their own. The music poured out of her, filling the small room with sound. It was soft at first, gentle and sad, like a lullaby for someone who was far away. But then it grew stronger, more complex, notes layered on top of each other, building into something powerful and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. Elena did not just play the melody. She expanded it. She added harmonies that she had always heard in her head but never been able to express. She let the music take her somewhere else, somewhere far from this room, and these strangers and all the doubt pressing down on her shoulders. When she finally stopped, her fingers resting on the last chord, the silence in the room was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Elena opened her eyes and looked around. Richard Hartwell's arms had fallen to his sides. The smirk had disappeared from the woman's face. Several people were staring at her with their mouths slightly open, but it was Mrs. Chen's reaction that made Elena's heart stop. The old woman was crying. Tears were streaming down her wrinkled cheeks, and her hand was pressed against her chest like she was trying to hold something inside. She was gripping her cane so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "That melody," Mrs. Chen whispered. Her voice was shaking. "Mikhail played that for me once. Only once. 33 years ago. In this very building. He told me he had written it for someone special, someone he loved more than anything. But he never wrote it down. He never recorded it. He said it was too personal, too sacred." She took a trembling step toward Elena. "How do you know that melody?" she asked. "How could you possibly know something that only existed in his heart?" Elena looked at the old woman, and she felt tears building in her own eyes. "Because my mother sang it to me," she said softly. "Every single night. She said my father wrote it for her. And for me. The night I was born. She called it my lullaby. The only gift he ever gave us." The room remained frozen. And in that moment, everything changed. Nobody was laughing at Elena anymore. The silence in that small practice room lasted for what felt like an eternity. Elena sat frozen on the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys. She could feel everyone staring at her. But the only person she really saw was Mrs. Chen. The old woman's tears had left wet trails down her cheeks, and she was looking at Elena like she was seeing a ghost. Richard Hartwell was the first to speak. His voice was quieter now, less certain than before. "Mrs. Chen, surely this is just a coincidence. Perhaps she heard a recording somewhere. Perhaps someone taught her that melody without her knowing where it came from." But Mrs. Chen shook her head firmly. "There is no recording, Richard. I told you. Mikhail never wrote it down. He never performed it for anyone except me. And that was only because I walked into his studio when he did not expect me. When he realized I had heard it, he made me promise never to speak of it. He said it was private, sacred, something between him and someone he had lost." She turned back to Elena, studying her face with new eyes. "He never told me who that someone was. I always assumed it was a woman from his past. Someone before he became famous, but now I think I understand." The woman in the red dress stepped forward. Her smirk was gone, replaced by something like confusion. "This is ridiculous. Even if the melody is real, even if Orlov did write it for someone, that does not prove this woman is his daughter. She could have learned it from anywhere. Her mother could have been lying to her." Elena felt anger rise in her chest, hot and sharp. "My mother never lied to me. Not once in her entire life. She was the most honest person I have ever known. Then why did she keep this secret for so long?" the woman demanded. "Why did she never come forward? Why did she never ask for what was rightfully hers?" "Because she loved him," Elena said simply. "She loved him enough to let him go. She knew that if anyone found out about me, it would destroy his career. He was at the peak of his fame when I was born. The world saw him as this perfect, untouchable genius. She did not want to ruin that for him. So she walked away. She raised me alone. She worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table, and she never asked him for a single thing." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. She could have sold her story to magazines. She could have gone to court and demanded money. But she did not. Because she was not that kind of person. All she wanted was for me to know the truth. And she made me promise that one day, after she was gone, I would come here and tell someone who I really am. The room was silent again. Elena could see doubt on some faces, but also something else. Something that looked almost like belief. Mrs. Chen reached out and took Elena's hand. Her fingers were thin and cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Come with me," she said softly. "There is something I need to show you." She led Elena out of the practice room and down another hallway. Richard Hartwell and the others followed close behind, none of them saying a word. They walked past more photographs, more concert programs, until they reached a heavy wooden door at the end of the corridor. Mrs. Chen pulled out a key from her pocket and unlocked the door. When she pushed it open, Elena gasped. The room was filled with boxes. Dozens of them, stacked from floor to ceiling. Some were made of cardboard, others were wooden crates. And on every box was a label with the same name written in black ink, Orlov. "This is the archive," Mrs. Chen explained. "Everything Mikhail left behind is stored here. His letters, his photographs, his personal journals. The estate has been trying to organize it for years, but there is simply too much. He kept everything." She walked to a shelf in the corner and pulled down a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked and faded, and the pages inside were yellow with age. Mrs. Chen flipped through them carefully until she found what she was looking for. "This is from 1989, she said. "The year you say you were born." She handed the journal to Elena. Elena's hands were shaking as she took it. She looked down at the page and saw handwriting. Beautiful, elegant handwriting that flowed across the paper, like music. The entry was dated the 15th of September, 1989. Elena began to read. "I have made a terrible mistake. I have fallen in love with someone I cannot have. Her name is Rosa, and she is the most beautiful soul I have ever known. She does not care about my fame or my money. She only cares about the music. When I play for her, I feel like I am truly alive for the first time in my life. But I am a coward. I cannot give her what she deserves. I cannot give her a normal life. I cannot give her my name. And now, she is gone. She left without saying goodbye. I do not know where she went. I only know that I will never forgive myself for letting her go. I wrote a melody for her last night. For her, and for the child she is carrying. Our child. A child I will never know. I will never play this melody for anyone. It belongs to them, and them alone." Elena's tears fell onto the page before she could stop them. She pressed the journal against her chest and closed her eyes, trying to breathe through the pain that was squeezing her heart. He knew. Her father had known about her. He had written a melody for her before she was even born. And he had carried that secret with him until the day he died. Mrs. Chen put a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. "I think we need to do a proper test," she said quietly. "A DNA test. To confirm what we already know in our hearts." Richard Hartwell nodded slowly. For the first time since Elena had met him, he did not look arrogant or dismissive. He looked like a man who was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. "I will arrange it," he said. "We have samples from Mikhail's personal effects. Hair from his favorite coat. It will take a few days to get the results." Elena did not care about the test. She already knew the truth. But she nodded anyway, because she understood that these people needed proof. They needed science to tell them what the melody and the journal had already shown. The next 3 days were the longest of Elena's life. Mrs. Chen insisted that she stay at a small hotel near the concert hall, and she paid for everything herself. Elena tried to refuse, but the old woman would not listen. "You have waited long enough," Mrs. Chen said. "Let someone take care of you for once." During those 3 days, Elena visited the archive several times. She read more of her father's journals. She learned about his struggles with fame, his loneliness, his desperate search for meaning in a life that often felt empty despite all his success. And with every page she read, she felt closer to him. Closer to the man she had never met, but had always carried inside her heart. On the fourth day, she received a phone call. The results were in. Elena walked into the Hartwell concert hall with her head held high. The same people who had laughed at her just days ago were now waiting in the lobby, their faces serious and respectful. Richard Hartwell stood at the front, holding a piece of paper in his hands. He cleared his throat and read the results out loud. The DNA analysis confirms a biological match. Elena Vasquez is the daughter of Mikhail Orlov. Elena heard the words, but they seemed to come from very far away. She felt dizzy. She felt like she was floating. She felt like her mother was standing right beside her, smiling. Mrs. Chen stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Elena. The old woman was crying again, but this time they were tears of joy. "Welcome home," she whispered. "Your father would be so proud of you." And for the first time in her life, Elena finally knew who she was. The news spread faster than Elena could have imagined. Within hours of the DNA results being announced, reporters started calling the concert hall. By the next morning, her name was in newspapers across the country. The secret daughter of Mikhail Orlov, the waitress who walked into a concert hall and proved she was the child of a legend. Elena did not care about the headlines. She did not care about the interviews or the television cameras that suddenly wanted to capture her face. She only cared about one thing: the piano. It took another week before they let her see it. There were legal matters to sort out, papers to sign, and endless meetings with lawyers who used words Elena did not fully understand. But Mrs. Chen stayed by her side through all of it, explaining things in simple terms and making sure nobody took advantage of her. Finally, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Mrs. Chen led Elena to a room she had never seen before. It was on the top floor of the concert hall, hidden behind a door that looked like all the others. But when Mrs. Chen opened it, Elena knew immediately that this place was special. The room was small and simple. There were no fancy decorations or expensive paintings on the walls, just wooden floors, tall windows that let in the afternoon sunlight, and a single grand piano sitting in the center of the room. Elena stopped breathing. The piano was beautiful. Its black surface gleamed like it had just been polished. The keys were perfectly white, without a single chip or stain, and on the music stand, there was a faded piece of sheet music with handwritten notes in the margins. "This is where he composed Winter Sparrow," Mrs. Chen said softly. "He spent 3 months in this room, working on that piece. He would not let anyone disturb him. He barely ate or slept, and when he finally finished, he sat down and cried like a baby." Elena walked toward the piano slowly, afraid that if she moved too fast, it might disappear like a dream. She reached out and touched the surface, feeling the cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. This was real. This was her father's piano. The same keys he had touched. The same instrument that had brought his music to life. "Go ahead," Mrs. Chen said. "Play something." Elena sat down on the bench. It was worn and soft, shaped by years of use. She wondered how many hours her father had spent sitting in this exact spot. She wondered what he had been thinking, what he had been feeling, as he created the music that would make him immortal. She placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she did not know what to play. There were so many choices, so many songs she had learned over the years. But in the end, there was only one piece that felt right. She began to play Winter Sparrow. The melody filled the room like sunlight pouring through a window. It started soft and delicate, like the first snowflake of the season falling from the sky. Then it grew stronger, more complex, building into something powerful and sweeping that seemed to fill every corner of the space. Elena closed her eyes and let the music carry her away. She was not thinking about the notes or the technique or whether she was playing it correctly. She was just feeling it, living it, breathing it. When she finished, tears were streaming down her face. She did not wipe them away. She just sat there, her hands still resting on the keys, listening to the silence that followed. Mrs. Chen was crying too. She walked over and sat down on the bench beside Elena, their shoulders touching. "He would have loved you," the old woman said. "I know he would have. You have his gift, his soul. It is all right there in your fingers." Elena shook her head. I am not like him. I am not a genius. I am just a waitress from a small town who got lucky. Mrs. Chen took Elena's hand and squeezed it gently. Luck had nothing to do with it. You worked for this. You sacrificed for this. You believed in yourself when nobody else did. That is not luck. That is courage. In the weeks that followed, Elena's life changed in ways she never could have predicted. The lawyers told her she was entitled to a share of her father's estate. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life, more than she could ever spend. But Elena did not want to spend it on herself. She thought about her mother, about all those years of struggle and sacrifice, about the broken keyboard and the cardboard keys, about all the children out there who loved music but could not afford lessons or instruments, children who dreamed of playing piano but had no one to teach them. Elena made a decision. She used the money to create a foundation in her father's name, the Orlov Music Foundation. Its purpose was simple: to provide free music education to children from poor families, to give them pianos and teachers and opportunities, to make sure that no child who wanted to learn music would ever be turned away because they did not have enough money. The announcement made headlines again. People called her generous and kind. But Elena did not feel generous. She felt grateful that she could finally do something meaningful with the gift her father had given her. 1 year after that first day at the concert hall, Elena stood on the stage of Hartwell Concert Hall in front of a sold-out audience. She was wearing a simple black dress that she had picked out herself. Her hair was pulled back in the same ponytail she had worn on the day she arrived. She did not look like a famous person. She just looked like herself. The audience fell silent as she walked to the grand piano at the center of the stage. It was the same piano from the small room upstairs, her father's piano. They had moved it down just for this performance. Elena sat down and adjusted the bench. She looked out at the crowd and saw faces filled with curiosity and expectation. She saw Mrs. Chen sitting in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. She saw Richard Hartwell a few seats away, his expression serious but respectful. He had apologized to her months ago, and she had forgiven him. She understood that he had only been trying to protect her father's legacy. He just had not known that she was part of that legacy too. She also saw something else. In the very back row, near the exit doors, she saw the woman in the red dress, the one who had laughed at her that first day, the one who had accused her of wanting money. The woman was not laughing now. She was sitting very still, watching Elena with an expression that looked almost like shame. Elena took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. She did not speak to the audience. She did not introduce herself or explain what she was about to play. She simply closed her eyes and began. The melody that filled the concert hall was not Winter Sparrow. It was not any piece that had ever been performed before. It was the lullaby. The melody her mother had hummed to her every night. The melody her father had written for a daughter he would never meet. Elena had spent months turning it into a full composition. She had added harmonies and variations, building on the simple tune until it became something complete. Something that told the whole story. The love between two people who could not be together. The child who grew up never knowing her father. The mother who kept a secret for 30 years. And the moment when all of that finally came to light. When she played the final note, the hall was completely silent. For a moment, Elena was afraid she had done something wrong. But then she heard it. A single person clapping. Then another. Then another. And suddenly the entire audience was on their feet, applauding so loudly that it shook the walls. Elena stood up and took a small bow. Tears were falling down her cheeks again, but she was smiling. She looked up at the ceiling, imagining that somewhere far above, her mother and father were watching her together. She had kept her promise. She had told the world who she was. And in doing so, she had finally found her place in it. The waitress from New Mexico was home at last.